I'll be introducing myself in the introduction part of the presentation, so you'll get to know me there. And this is just an outline of what I'm going to go through. We're going to talk about where we are today. We're going to talk about a problem that has local roots, where we need to go, and what you can do about it. So that's the outline. The introduction is a bit long, but I think you'll find that it's worth your time. So first of all, I'm here representing myself and a group called People for Climate Action. So what the heck is People for Climate Action? Probably comes to mind. This is our mission statement. Our purpose is to encourage all of our local governments in King County to live up to the pledge that most of them made 5 years ago in 2014 when they joined what's called the King County Cities Climate Collaboration and hit those greenhouse gas reduction goals that they agreed to, among which is a 50% reduction in those greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. What do we mean by a comprehensive plan? We're trying to get all of our different jurisdictions to have what's a comprehensive plan, not just bits and pieces. It's a plan that covers all of the bases, and there are a lot of bases to cover, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. A good example of a comprehensive plan you can find on the website. Portland, Multnomah County have a very extensive 171 different actions, climate action plan that you can study on their website. So just Google Portland, Multnomah County climate action plan and you'll find out all you want to know about it. I've got a printed version back in my briefcase if you're interested in scanning that. Our local focused plan needs to obviously include an equity piece, and it needs to be in all of the actions considered. And at least every other year, whatever plan is developed as a comprehensive plan needs to be reviewed and tweaked at least every other year. Our People for Climate Action is really a coalition of different city groups. We have city groups for People for Climate Action in 14 different cities. Here's the list. We're trying to build up membership in all of those cities. Some of them have only a handful of people, others have many. So if you're in one of these cities, you can at least find out about them through me or by going online and our People for Climate Action website. You can register your name and email address, and then there'll be follow-up with you. And I'm going to send around a clipboard here. If you'd like to do that right now and you're not already on our email list, you can sign it up right on the clipboard. We also are allied with and have participation from a number of different other organizations, many of which you're probably familiar with. I won't read them all off, but if you're in other organizations that are typically called environmental groups, then you're likely allied with us and you didn't know it. So some personal background. Whenever I go to hear a speaker, I always wonder, well, why is this person here? And what motivated him, and why should I listen or not? And so I'm going to give you some background, and it helps to explain why we got where we are today in People for Climate Action Group. So when I was back in high school, long ago, those thrilling days of yesteryear, how many of you remember that line?
Hi-yo, Silver.
Yes. So I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and I think that qualified me, at least I thought it qualified me to be an environmentalist. And then I got a few engineering degrees and got really my brain trained to be science focused and research problems well, and identify the problem causes and separate those from the effects and analyze causes. So I'm really programmed that way. Not all people are, and that's kind of helped to spur me on to this mission. But what really kicked me into the climate action mission was a trip that I took in 2002, an REI adventure trip to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And as we crossed from landing in Nairobi and crossed from Kenya into Tanzania, where the mountain is located at the border crossing to get our passport stamped, we had to get out of the van. We were greeted by some Maasai young ladies, and they were, of course, trying to give us gifts, hoping that we would give gifts in return. And I was struck by one particular comment as I strode over to get my passport stamp, that one of these ladies remarked. I had an empty plastic water bottle in my pocket, and she asked me, "Sir, could I please have that empty water bottle? I could use it to feed my milk to my baby." The Maasai people, as you may know, live off their cattle primarily, and they use the milk as well as drink blood for most of their sustenance. We saw as we drove further towards the mountain several young boys, because that's their job in their society, tending to their herds of cattle. And of course, as we got near the mountain, we also saw the different wildlife and appreciated that. That was part of what we came for. And at the foot of the mountain near the trail where we started, we noticed that there was a village, and that nearly all the people we saw, these were not Maasai people, but like the Maasai people, were basically living off the land. So they were sustenance farmers, and here's a young man with some bananas, but most of them were in a pretty basic village. And I recall as we drove through the village near the trailhead, seeing a little boy with a stick chasing a hoop that he was pushing around, and reminiscent of the kind of economy that we read about back in the 1800s in the frontiers of North America. We did a lot of 5 days worth of hiking to get to the top of the mountain, and at the top of the mountain, which is 5,000 feet higher than Mount Rainier, but on the equator, so not quite as cold, we saw a glacier, and this glacier was rapidly receding. Our guide told us that this would be gone within 10 years of our ascent, most likely according to the current projections then. So it's probably gone now. But we were also advised by one of the members of our REI adventure group that we were causing the problem. Global warming was taking away the glacier, and I thought, well, that means that those subsistent farmers and the Maasai cattle that are probably dependent on stream flow all year long are going to have a problem. Of course, then we went off, camped on the Serengeti, and that was all great. But as I was flying out of Africa and looking down on where we had been, I was not thinking of all that flora and fauna or the great view from the top of the mountain. I was thinking about the people and how we were impacting them and their future. So when I got back to Seattle and started back into my regular business routine, I work in commercial building and project management for some large and modest-sized commercial buildings. I got to realize when I joined the U.S. Green Building Council, that was also starting up at the turn of the century, that there's a lot of what I was doing and others in the building industry were doing that impacts our greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, I went to a U.S. Green Building Council presentation around that same year and saw this map of North America if all the ice melts. And it got me to realize we're not only impacting people in Africa, but we're threatening our whole livelihood here and everywhere else around the world. And I saw this chart that showed that buildings have a large part nationally of our impact on energy as well as greenhouse gases. And of course that then tied in what I was doing professionally to all the disasters we ever seen around the world. And that was sort of my mushroom moment, if you will, where I really got kicked into gear thinking about what we're doing. And ever since then, I've been nearly obsessed, my wife would probably say not nearly, about climate action and what we can do about it. And I've been on a learning curve, probably ahead of most people. I'm not ever gonna know all there is to know because there is a tremendous amount, but I'm here probably because people have pointed out that I seem to be fairly far along on that learning curve, and I'm hoping to share that with you so that you can move up that learning curve a bit yourselves. The more of us that learn about what we see as the problem and the potential solutions, the better chance we have of solving this huge, huge problem that we have. So where are we today? You've seen the pictures. Dorian is just one of the examples of the superstorms that keep hatching bigger and with greater frequency than ever before. We're living it. You all remember last year, I presume, and the fires. Do you remember the newspaper back on October 9th? Seattle Times headline, 0.5 degree's a big deal. 2 degrees isn't gonna cut it. We've gotta limit ourselves to a 1.5 degrees Celsius if we're gonna prevent climate disaster. If the earth warms anymore, we're all in peril, according to the United Nations IPCC report. And the reality is we're very, very close to what is called a tipping point. Our fingers are on the scale. The tipping point, if it's reached, will turn the earth in an automatic pilot, continually warming, regardless of what we do. And then we're really in for deep disasters. To understand the urgency, you need to understand some of the science. I'm just going to give you a smattering here real quick. This is a average, a middle of the road projection for what our climate is going to look like by the latter part of this century. Purple indicates, see down here on the scale, the change in average temperature, 13 degrees at the poles. A little less as you back off, but the deep red, 9 degrees. Notice where most of that is at. The most severe warming is at the poles. Well, that also happens to be where most of our frozen ground and tundra is. And that frozen ground and tundra has captured within it lots of methane. Methane is 84 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. There's a heck of a lot of it up there in those polar regions. And the more we warm, the more that gets released, and the more we warm. So at some point, and it's very soon, according to the IPCC report, it's probably in about 10 years from now, 2030. We're going to be in a situation where that warming just perpetuates itself regardless of what we do. So we have to act fast, it's urgent, and it's critical. Now, other scientists, including this young scientist at the UW, who was quoted in an opinion published just a few days later in the Seattle Times, say that there's still time, but we have to act really fast. We can't solve the problem. So what is the problem? Well, I'll just tell you before I get into the rest of the slides here, in a nutshell, it's us. It's the politics. It's our political motivation. We have all of the necessary technology, though we still would like to learn more technologies in the future. But we got all the necessary technologies to solve the problem right now. We just don't have the political will.
We've had the technology for a long
We've had them
time.
for a long time. A lot of us, especially those that aren't as inclined to study the science, could use some kind of metaphor to carry away in our heads for what's going on, so I'm going to show you that. But the problems are in three primary categories. They're in our buildings, in our cities, transportation sector, and in the food and agriculture, including forestry sector, which is how we're making use of our uninhabited land that's outside of our cities. So to help you visualize, you might want to think of these as three different birds of prey. We got to bring all three down. We hatched them. We got to bring them down. And we don't bring them down with 3 silver bullets, certainly not 1 silver bullet. We're going to take and need a lot of buckshot. The reality is each of those 3 major problems is multifaceted, and we have to have a lot of different actions and approaches to all those complexities. So we need a lot of buckshot. Why do local governments matter? Well, it's because 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our cities, or at least are attributable to our cities and what we do in our cities. So that's where a lot of the solutions need to be developed.
City politicians seem to be more accountable to.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that.
Seem.
But we as citizens elect our public officials, so we should have some influence with them. Now we can talk about what we can do individually. You know, we can drive smarter cars or not drive at all. We can eat smarter. We can make our buildings our homes a lot more efficient. But really the power and the solution is going to have to be with collective action. The K4C was started 4 years ago, King County Cities Climate Collaboration, 4Cs, K4C. 12 cities were initially involved, there are now 16. And a letter that was signed by those 12 cities, they pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here are the 16 that are current cities in the K4C. This was part of their pledge. There's a little more detail to what they said, but essentially these were the greenhouse gas reduction targets. By 2030, which is how many months away now? 4, 3, 5? Anyway, I think it's 3.
2020.
2020.
2020, what did I say? Thank you. 2020 goal is to reduce greenhouse gases by 25%. Last time there are measurements that have been made, which is 2017, the average across the county is estimated to be about a 1% reduction. Doesn't seem too likely we're going to hit that first goal. And then by 2030, we've got to be 50% reduced, and that's very close to what the IPCC report said back in October. They said we've got to have a drastic reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions, roughly 45%, based on a little bit different baseline by 2030. In short, we got to do a whole lot fast, and these 10 years that are ahead of us are critical. Well, the great ambitions of the K4C, which is led by the county executive, and hats off to them for hatching this plan, for coming up with this idea and getting support from 12 cities, now 16, involve multiple steps. Almost all the cities in the K4C have acknowledged the problem. Most have set goals, not all, and several have measured their greenhouse gas emissions. But that's about as far as we've gotten so far. There have been some good developments and some significant legislation at the state level supported by members of the K4C, but not a whole lot has been done in most of our local governments. So we're looking at a problem that's gonna have to take a little different shape. And we need to talk about what we need to do to make this goal and ambition really work. That is the ambition of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to thoroughly plan how to make that happen. And we've got to schedule and implement a bunch of actions, and then we have to regularly monitor and update that action plan so that we get a curve that looks like this, that gets us where we need to be by 2030 and then on into the 2050 range where there was a pledge for 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, why hasn't this happened? Why don't we have these strong plans already? I would say the big reason is we haven't had enough public interest, public outcry. But there are other reasons. Your city council members and your county council members are tugged in many, many different directions. They've got a lot of people asking them to do a lot of things. And as you would be if you were in their shoes, most likely, they respond to the squeakiest wheel or to the one that seems to resonate the most with them. Sometimes other things speak like money. So climate action is also pretty complex, and it's hard to figure out for any individual, myself included, how do we solve this problem? So because it's complicated, because there's not a big outcry, because we're short on funds, it gets put off. So I've already talked to a certain extent about what needs to be in a climate action plan that's comprehensive and thorough enough. There need to be a lot of steps. I'll remind you again, the Portland one that has a constant trajectory now for 2 decades of reducing greenhouse gas emissions has 171 different actions that they're pursuing. And we have to have the right frame of mind. You can't be criticizing those people who haven't acted because we're the ones that haven't pushed them to act on our behalf. We have to be optimistic. We have to promote careful study, not just promote an idea or two like more bike lanes or stop new natural gas installation in new buildings. Those are great things to do, but they are 2 of 150 to 200 actions that we really need to do if we're going to make this big dent. We need some expert assistance probably to do that. There's a good book out, came out in 2017, written by former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, and the former CEO of Sierra Club co-wrote it, called Climate of Hope. Got a copy in the back here of my own. One of the quotations is this right here: "This is a conversation that must be led by everyday citizens and local leaders. It's up to us to change the tenor and tone of the climate discussion away from partisanship and toward problem solving." We can have many benefits of a good climate action plan. It can improve health, improve the equity in our community, that is the climate justice. It can save money, can attract businesses, and preserve our natural environment. We've studied quite a few different things in our People for Climate Action group. Here's another good resource. You'll find it online, free, the Carbon Free City Handbook. won't get into the details, time's running short here in my presentation. But one of the things they show us is something that I learned more than 10 years ago back in the meetings at the U.S. Green Building Council. A lot of our problem, that's the yellow, is our buildings. Transportation, the dark blue, is another big part of the problem. You put those two together and you've got 75 to 80% of our problem in our cities that cities can act on. Other elements too, like our waste and industry and other parts of the puzzle, but those are the two big ones that we need to conquer. And that is in alignment with our greenhouse gas emissions in Bellevue, where they've done an inventory. Here's all the building sector, here's the transportation sector. Buildings are about 44%, transportation's 42%. They've got some good sections in the handbook, I'm just gonna run right by them. We looked around for good climate action plans across the country online. Two that we found were in Fort Collins and in Portland. You can go check them out online. I already talked about the Portland plan, 171 actions. Here's an example of one of the 171 actions that you'll find online in their book. It describes the action. It shows the potential impacts. The blue C's are the carbon reduction or the greenhouse gas emission reduction. Economic benefit, there's a chart right here that shows what they're categorizing as benefits for each one of their actions. And here's the results in Portland, Multnomah County. The purple line shows their greenhouse gas emissions reduction through 2016. It's gone down a little more since. All the while their population's been increasing, their jobs have been increasing. So a conclusion in, again, Climate of Hope is an important change in the century has been mayor's recognition that promoting private investment requires protecting public health, and protecting public health requires fighting climate change. So what can you do? By now, probably fairly obvious. You can join with others in this People for Climate Action group across King County. Sign up on that clipboard or go to our website. You can act as an ally when you're talking to council members, not as an adversary. Be respectful and tell your council members, county level or city, we need a strong climate action plan, comprehensive climate action plan. And you can take other efforts like sending emails or writing letters to the editor and so forth. Offer positive statements, gotta be optimistic, we really can do this. City economies will benefit, we'll grow a positive future. And these kinds of ideas as well. I'm going to say you can go to council meetings, but when our People for Climate Action gets together, we meet not only in council meeting formats, but we go in individually, schedule meetings with our council members. We're doing this on a county basis, county council basis, as well as city councils. You can get on our email list on the website here. Our next coalition meeting of all the city groups, representatives, is coming up this next Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock at the Kingsgate Library. We move it around different public libraries if you'd like to attend. But a really important thing that's coming up for our group, and I think for the county as a whole, is we're planning to have a council member, maybe more than one, introduce a resolution declaring a climate emergency in King County. And we're believing that will happen on the 25th of September. It's not on the agenda yet, so that's why I said believing, but it's likely going to be that date. And that also coincides with the one day a month that the county council allows open public comment. And they meet at 9:30 in the morning on Wednesday, that 25th, in in the county council chambers, downtown, county courthouse. So if you want to come and support us, I hope you'll consider being there. We have green bandanas that we typically wear when we have our group show up at a council meeting, and perhaps you'll want to share one of those that we'll have available at that meeting. The next few months, try to get into a PCA meeting near you, and if you want to know what that is, make sure you sign up on our email list. It's going on the clipboard or go online and you'll find it out. And you could consider joining one of our committee members. And just got the time signal, coincidentally. That's the end of my presentation. I don't know if you want to take time now for questions, but I'll be around after your next presentation and in your breakout groups. So if you want to take the time to interact then, I'll be happy to stick around.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Court. What we'd like to do to stay on schedule as best possible for our meeting is